Hey everyone, welcome back again to Joel Reads Comics. We're back again for another week with another supercut. In this case, we are honoring the special anniversary of Alias by tackling one of my favorite Jessica Jones stories, courtesy of one of my favorite writers in Gail Simone. This one was from a couple years back. I figure with the anniversary and with the fact that Jess and Christian Ritter are going to be returning for Daredevil Born Again Season 2, now would be the perfect time to check this one out. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you everyone who watched the previous video. If you are not subscribed already, please do. I'm trying to get monetization turned on for this channel. I thought I actually did have it, but I didn't, so consider this a little bit of a subscription drive. We're very close to 1,000. I would love to get us to 1,000 by the end of the week, so hey, let's shoot for that, everyone, and without further ado, let's get to it.
Jessica Jones has worn many hats in her life: superhero, detective, mother, and survivor. But what happens when Jess comes face to face with other versions of herself from the multiverse? Well, let's hop into the pages of The Variance, issue number 1, a brand new series brought to us courtesy of Gail Simone. So then, as we join the book, we check back on in with Jessica Jones. She's walking the streets of New York, and in her internal monologue, we hear that she's revisiting some of her old haunts from a lifetime ago. Specifically, her favorite old coffee shop. Apparently, she came to this place a lot back in the day when her life was a lot darker and a lot more unpredictable. She doesn't go in though, because as we discover later, Jess is actively trying to give up coffee. Which, geez, you know, if given the option of having to quit caffeine cold turkey or fight a bunch of supervillains, I think I'd take the supervillain fight. Honestly, it would hurt me less. It seems that one of Marvel's most hard-bitten private investigators is getting all sorts of nostalgic right now, because she also remembers back during the days before her and Luke were married. Jess had never been a girly girl, but she vividly remembers the day she went and tried shopping for makeup so she could look nice for her own wedding. She's so hilariously out of her own depth she doesn't even know what shade she likes. I don't know, black, I guess? People wear that to weddings, right? The clerk says that every shade could make you feel like you're a new person living a totally different life, and oh boy, if that isn't some signposting, I sure as hell don't know what is. We also discover that Jess has been suffering from horrible headaches the last few days. Mainly she just chopped it up to caffeine withdrawal, but when she almost passes out on the street and cracks her head open. Though thankfully Daredevil was nearby to swoop on in and make the save. Of course, Matt isn't doing all of this just out of the kindness of his own heart to try and help a friend. Mainly he wants Jess to sit in on a special competency hearing that's being held tomorrow. He thinks that Jess would have some rather interesting insight into this case he's working, but she's actually kinda hesitant about the whole thing and has to be worn down by Daredevil. Matt also makes a crack about her wardrobe and says that she should maybe try and wear something a little less scary, and why yes, the irony isn't lost on Jess at all that a blind man just tried to give her fashion advice. A historically sharp-dressed blind man, but still. Now the next day, Jess actually does end up going back to that coffee shop, even though she told herself she wouldn't, and it's a good thing she did too, because the local owner is actually being shaken down by a group of criminals claiming to be Hammerhead and his gang. Naturally, Jess doesn't fear these guys and their retro zoot suits and manages to completely wipe the floor with these guys while her drink is still hot. The hilarious twist being that none of these guys were actually Hammerhead. They were only tricking people into thinking they were working for Hammerhead because one guy wore a hat. I mean, hey, can you blame the coffee shop owner? This is Marvel's New York. There's at least a 50-50% chance that someone who says they're working for Hammerhead probably works for Hammerhead. After that little workout, Jess gets changed like Matt asked for and makes it to the courthouse. What is so important that Matt had to reach out for Jess? Well, get ready for this. Apparently the woman that Matt is defending right now murdered her entire family one night by setting their home on fire with a bottle of kerosene. Why did she do it? Well, she claims that Zedediah Kilgrave, the Purple Man, told her to. Obviously, if you know anything about Jessica Jones, you'll know that she suffered a horrible trauma at the hands of the Purple Man, and those scars are still very much slow to heal. Worse still, Jess knows full well how the courts feel about that "I had my mind controlled by a supervillain" defense. Mainly, they don't like it, even in a world as fantastical as this one. It's a hard thing to prove and an even scarier thing for judges and lawyers to wrap their heads around, that someone could very easily take control of them whenever they wanted. Now here's where the book gets really interesting. Jess, at the behest of Matt, has a sit-down meeting with this lady and tries to give a sympathetic ear. Jess talks about how the Purple Man is in a coma and how he can't hurt her now, but here's the thing, that's not what the lady wanted to talk about at all. As this lady explains, before Jess was a victim of Zedediah Kilgrave, she was, in fact, all of the horrors that he inflicted on Jess, he perfected on this poor woman. One day when he was bored of her, he just kind of let her go, but before he did, Kilgrave said that he left behind a psychic trap in her mind that would go off on the 10th anniversary of when they first met. And well, here's the thing, it's only a few days away from Jessica Jones's own 10-year anniversary with the Purple Man. This lady has actually met her today to try and warn her, fearing that Jess might very well become a danger to herself and her own family. Jess is horrified with this news, and she's also mad at Daredevil for not telling her the whole story before she sat down to this meeting. Jess rushes home from the courthouse, only when she makes it back she realizes there's someone in her place, someone who's dressed, well, exactly like how she used to be and standing in Danny's room. Jess attacks this stranger but quickly realizes she's punching her own face. Granted, that doesn't slow her down too much. Again, she's a character in the Marvel Universe. She knows all about Skrulls and Doombots and chameleons. Just because this person looks like her, it doesn't necessarily mean a damn thing, right? That is, however, until Captain America's mighty shield ends up getting flung between the two women, the person throwing it none other than Jess herself, only she claims to be Captain America. Meaning as the first issue of this series comes to a close, this situation just got a whole lot more complicated. So then, this issue actually starts with yet another flashback to the early days of Jess as a private investigator. She's having lunch with Tigra of Avengers fame, and in her internal monologue, Jess talks about how hard it must be being a lady superhero like this, to have so many eyes on you, to have the paparazzi waiting for you to screw up or act human. Like poor Janet the Wasp, who had saved a boy from falling to his death only for the paper to run a series of very unflattering photos and headlines about her. In many ways, maybe not staying a traditional costumed crime fighter means that Jess dodged some real bullets. Now, Tigra had actually been working with Jess as a PI, but she's going to be leaving her soon because she got an offer to join A-Force, the big all-women's Avenger team. Jess feels more than a little hurt, not just to be losing Tigra, but that A-Force was founded by her friend Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, who didn't seem to reach out and ask her to join the group. Honestly, Jess, I wouldn't feel too bad. You might only get solo series infrequently, but by and large, your books have lasted much longer than A-Force lasted as a series. Before Tigra leaves, though, she does talk about how much she really enjoyed working in Hell's Kitchen, how it's kind of this beautiful, magical blind spot in the Marvel Universe. The Ultrons, the Doctor Dooms of the world never seem to start trouble here. But God help everyone if they ever do, they'll probably burn the whole place to the ground. These words end up radiating throughout Jess's mind once we actually pick back up with her in modern day. You'll remember that Jess had returned home after a disastrous day in court, only to find two other versions of Jessica Jones waiting for her, one more closer to how she was in Alias, and another that's dressed like Captain America, complete with S.H.I.E.L.D. None of these women actually have much time for each other because, well, Jess is just kinda like that regardless of the variant, quick to action. Neither believe the other is the genuine article, and things only get worse when Jess and Luke's daughter Danny ends up entering frame. I gotta say, I love that she is wearing an Iron Fist t-shirt to honor her namesake Danny Rand. All the Jesses end up going full mama bear and the fight only escalates further, as they all equally want to protect Danny from the perceived danger of the others. It's a good thing that Luke comes back at this point too and helps even the odds. Cap Jess and Alias Jess end up bolting, and Jess Prime ends up passing out from all the excitement, in doing so going to some sort of mindscape ruled over by the Purple Man. Kilgrave gloats for a little bit, saying that his big master plan to have Jess go nuts and murder her whole family is coming along quite nicely. I know in the first issue I theorized that maybe these whole variant Jesses weren't actually from the multiverse and maybe they're just mental projections created by the Purple Man, but we've actually seen Luke Cage interact with one of them, so now I know that's not the case. Also, I could be totally off base here, but during Jess and Kilgrave's conversation, did they drop reference to that Kelly Thompson digital series, The Purple Child? I didn't read it because I didn't think it was in continuity, but now I'm beginning to think it was and I missed something. When Jess comes to, she's understandably shaken to her very core. It's abundantly clear now that this Purple Man threat can't be ignored. To make matters worse, Maria Snyder, the woman that her and Daredevil were trying to help in the previous issue, hung herself in prison after Jess left. The only thing that was left behind was a letter that simply read, happy anniversary. Jess tells Luke to grab their daughter Danny and leave somewhere that she'll never be able to find them for at least the next 24 hours while she goes out of her way to try and make preparations. Now, at the other end of the story, we actually check back on in with one of the variants. It seems that alias Jess has been running around the streets looking for Daredevil, which has actually been pretty hard for her because she's been told that Daredevil in this world is a woman now. That's funny. When she does find Matt, though, she proceeds to throw herself into his arms. Apparently, in her world, they're a couple instead of Jess and Luke Cage. Interesting. This is actually a pretty short aside, and I can only imagine we're going to rejoin it in the next issue. Now, back with Jess Prime, she places a call to Jen Walters, the She-Hulk, for help. The idea being that Jen is not only a friend, but one of the only people who can take a punch from Jess and not flinch if she truly is going to go nuts in the next 24 hours because of some Purple Man programming. She wants someone big and strong with her best interest at heart to not only protect her, but protect others from what she might end up doing. You're also probably wondering, why is Jen wearing her old Fantastic Four costume? Well, she was told to hurry, so she grabbed the first thing she could find. Before the full 24-hour clock even begins counting down, though, they end up hearing more rustling in Danny's bedroom. They go to investigate, and they're both shocked to discover yet another Jess variant. This time, it's Jewel, Jess's old, long and forgotten superhero moniker. The big difference between this variant and the other two, though, is that Jewel Jess has seemed to come here for help and not to fight, but to understand more of that, we'll have to check back in on the very next issue. So then, picking up from where the last issue left off, Jess had actually come face to face with a version of herself from another universe where she seemingly stayed Jewel. All the other Jesses really did her head in, but this one especially is a real shock to the system. In fact, Jess can't help but think back to that overly helpful makeup counter attendant from the very first issue who said a single shade could completely change your life. And well, yeah, that's basically what's happening here. The worst part about it for Jess is that Jewel is actually super friendly and super helpful, everything that Jess herself genuinely struggles with. In fact, She-Hulk is still here from the end of the last issue, and she's equally surprised. She was under the impression that all these other variant Jesses from other universes were somehow out to get her, only for Jess Prime to have to admit, yeah, I kind of threw the first punch when we met because, well, it's just in my nature, sadly. Jess also comes to the realization that these horrible, debilitating headaches she's been suffering since this series began are actually tied to all of these different variants. She's had 4 headaches, but only seen 3 different Jesses, which means that she has to call up all of her different street-level superhero friends if they're going to round them all up in time. Danny Rand, the Iron Fist, does his part, finding the Captain America Jessica Jones looking wistfully outside Avengers Mansion. Apparently they had one just like this back in her world until something truly horrible happened. Daredevil Matt Murdock had already left the white-shirted version of Jessica Jones, the one who had actually fallen in love with her world's Daredevil, a conversation that's very uncomfortable for Matt to have with his Jess. So yeah, all in all, that was easy enough. This time they hope if they get all the different variants together, they can compare notes, and maybe this time it won't devolve into a giant punching match. It's also around this time, too, that Jess realizes that Jewel Jess actually never went through what happened with the Purple Man on her Earth, which means that she wants to go out of her way to protect Jewel at all cost, as she represents, well, essentially her own lost innocence. What I particularly like about Jewel Jess is that she's a super girly girl who even asks Jess Prime why she's leaving without touching up her makeup. Where do all of these different Jesses decide to meet up? Well, the coffee shop from the first issue. In fact, that hammerhead wannabe is back there again trying to shake down the business owner. His scheme may have been completely undone by Jess the first time around, but now he's decided to bring in the strong man from the Circus of Crime for extra muscle. Not that that does him any good either. One Jess was able to beat him up without breaking a sweat. Now there's 4 Jesses. Now that all the Jesses are officially in one place and not punching each other, they can finally talk shop. It's here that Jess Prime comes to a rather interesting realization, and that is that all these other Jesses from all these other worlds have one thing in common. And that is that at one point or another, they all lost the men they love to fighting super crime. How interesting is it that Jess actually has a happy relationship with Luke Cage and a daughter? Never in a million years did she consider that she could ever be the content one. But then again, that is the interesting thing about multiversal theory, isn't it? Infinite worlds mean infinite possibilities, and while we spend so much time comparing ourselves ourselves to our potential other selves did we ever stop and consider that we were actually the better off ones? Jess Prime also feels comfortable enough to tell her new compatriots about everything that's been going on with the Purple Man and this potential ticking time bomb that is existing in her own mind, threatening to explode and kill her whole happy family. Jess Prime had sent Luke and little Danny away for their own safekeeping, and in this issue we discover where exactly they went. Turns out they're shacking up with Misty Knight and the Daughters of the Dragon right now. I particularly like Aunt Misty trying to play Pokemon cards with Danny, and they're so clearly Pokemon cards too. Luke leaves for a second to try and catch his breath when he's accosted by a mysterious young man in the elevator. At first, Luke, showing just how clever he is, thinks to ask, "Hey, your name isn't Jeff or something, is it?" Only for the kid to punch the former Power Man in the face with super strength and say, "No, Jesse actually, but good guess." And once again, yeah, infinite worlds, infinite possibilities. Not every multiversal Jess is gonna be a woman, so yeah, we got young boy Jesse. Why is he here now, though, attacking Luke? Well, Jesse ends up getting thrown out of a window before he can fully explain himself, but he says that whatever is truly going on here isn't involving just Jess, it's involving her daughter too. It's also heavily implied that all those different variant Jesses that Jess Prime is hanging out with right now, not all of them are trustworthy and not all of them are actually telling the truth. So then, picking up almost directly from where the last issue had left off, things had calmed down just enough for Prime Universe Jess to have a much needed, long overdue heart-to-heart with her multiversal variants. It would seem that the one thing that actually ties together all these travelers from other universes, be it Captain America Jess, Jewel Jess, or Omega Jess, is that none of them actually have families. In fact, when our Prime Universe Jess actually works up the courage to show the others a picture of Danny and Luke, Omega Jess ends up freaking the hell out. And I mean, it makes sense that Jess is closer to the original Jessica Jones from the Alias series, who I'm assuming in her world lived a life that didn't end with her happily riding off with Luke and having a daughter. Speaking of major narrative bombs dropped at the end of the previous issue, our Jess was handed a note from a mysterious waitress who told her not to trust the three other people at her table. When Jess goes to the bathroom, she ends up being accosted by this waitress, who turns out to be yet another multiversal Jess. This one turns out to be a street-level vigilante going by the name Night Press, and I can't exactly be sure if she's supposed to be that universe's answer to Daredevil, or maybe if Jessica Jones had become a Spider-Woman analog. You tell me. Because honestly, her costume looks like it could go either way. Now, the clock is very much ticking down right now to whether or not Jess is going to go crazy because of that psychic bomb that the Purple Man put inside her brain. No one really seems to have much of a plan except for Night Press, which in and of itself is pretty damn suspicious that she comes out of nowhere and starts directing the others on what to do. Jess Prime makes some phone calls, first to Luke to find out whether or not he and her daughter are safe. They are, after Luke just narrowly managing to escape a male version of Jessica Jones from the end of the previous issue. Now that they know this problem is much worse than just Jess and just the Purple Man, it's decided that the Avengers are actually going to take custody of Luke and Danny until all of this can be settled. That's not the only call Jess made either, but more on that in a minute. Now that she knows her family is safe from herself or anyone else, Jess decides now is time for a seance. The plan is quite simple. Before Jess can go nuts, she's going to go deep inside her own mind and have one final showdown with the Purple Man. It's all very Freddy Krueger, if you ask me. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, if it was this easy for Jess to defeat the Purple Man and undo his psychic programming, wouldn't she have done so much earlier? Well, the answer is Jess isn't doing this alone. She called in a ringer. She got Luke to call his old teammate Wolverine, who in turn got in contact with Professor frickin' Xavier, one of the Earth's most powerful psychics, who is now in Jess's mind to help her out. Seriously, how has it taken this long to have a Purple Man versus Xavier story? Professor X is so wonderfully pompous to, "Oh, Purple Man, I hear you've been talking mad shit. I hear you think you're the master of the mental. Well, guess what? You're a fucking insect next to me, bro." Also, too, if you've been reading the Krakoan X-Men books, it's actually kind of funny to see Xavier doing something that is undeniably heroic and not looking for something in exchange or secretly working some underhanded angle. Professor X gives Purple Man the mental beatdown before eventually discovering something rather interesting. You see, Chuck tries to get inside Purple Man's mind and ask him some very simple questions. Who was your high school crush? What was the name of your pet? Etc, etc. Only, here's the thing, Kilgrave doesn't give Kilgrave answers, he gives Jess's answers, right down to saying that she had a crush on Peter Parker in high school. Oh, I love when that piece of continuity comes back. The big reveal being that Purple Man never really was inside Jess's mind at all. He's just a psychic projection put there to screw with her. That basically means he has to be still dead, and if he's still dead, there's no way that the Purple Man could also be behind all of these variant problems that Jess has been dealing with. So yeah, basically the Purple Man, the psychic bomb, was all one giant red herring, or should I say purple herring, to protect the real perpetrator of all these events, who is revealed to be none other than Jewel Jess. Yes, that's right, the most heroic looking of the Jess variants, the most wholesome one, actually turns out to be the true villainous mastermind behind all of this. But why is Jewel doing this? Well, the answer is actually very fascinating. You see, Jewel Jess is actually violently jealous of Jess Prime, and because of that, she has come here to actively steal away her daughter Dani for herself, which explains why she was in her room when she first appeared. And while Cap Jess and Omega Jess are equally as confused about all of this as Jess Prime, it's revealed that Jewel Jess isn't working alone. In fact, she's recruited a whole legion of evil Jess variants to help complete her final mission as the comic comes to a close. So then, picking up directly from where the last issue left off, Jess Prime of Earth 616 was horrified to discover that it wasn't actually the Purple Man at all who had been screwing with her, but instead an evil version of herself where she remained Jewel from another Earth. Jewel Jess, we discover, is trying to steal not only Jessica Jones's daughter, but indeed her whole life, viewing it much better than her own. Why, she even brought with her a whole army of other evil Jessica Joneses to try and get the job done. Now, that's not to say that every Jess is on Jewel Jess's side, at least 3. Captain America Jess, Alias Era Jess, and even Nitrous Jess are actually still very much on our Jess's side and want to help her save the day on this one. In fact, Nitrous Jess is actually only here in the first place from another universe to try and bring Jewel Jess to justice, which is why she never trusted her from the get-go. Also, big thanks to Supreme Silver in the comment section of my last video for reminding me that Nitrous actually comes from the very final issue of The Pulse, wherein Jessica Jones talks to her daughter about briefly becoming another hero, after everything that went down with Kilgrave, whose name was, yes, that's right, Nitrous, and I guess in this universe she actually kept that identity going. Now, before the big final battle truly kicks off, Jess Prime actually goes out of her way to try and de-escalate things. After all, she's a woman who beats herself up figuratively more than most people. So if she can stop from doing it literally, that would be one giant plus. Sadly, evil Jewel Jess will not be dissuaded, and it's here we actually learn her origin and what makes her tick. As we discover, on Jewel Jess's Earth, she actually developed superpowers much earlier than Jess Prime at the tender age of only 16. And wouldn't you know it, but getting amazing powers so soon in life really ended up messing her up. She had a very parasocial relationship with Scott Summers of the X-Men of all people. And when word got out that he was marrying Jean Grey, Jewel Jess completely snapped, murdering him and also all of the other X-Men at the X-Mansion. Now you're thinking to yourself, how could Jess possibly do that? She's really strong, but she's not like that strong. Well, wouldn't you know, in a multiverse filled with infinite possibilities and infinite outcomes, there's a Jess who became Jewel but also developed a completely different set of powers. Basically, on this Earth, Jewel was some sort of power vampire capable of draining the abilities out of any superpowered individual that she came across. She ran through the X-Men before eventually running through every other hero on her planet. It was an addiction, a quest to forever try and fill the great empty hole inside of herself. And when eventually there were no more superpowered people left to drain, Jewel stole the Eye of Agamotto from her Earth's Doctor Strange and used it to start jumping multiverses. She created a small army of other versions of herself by threatening their own friends and family, and it's right here, right now, that evil Jewel Jess thinks that she can finally be made whole if only our Jess is willing to give up her life and family. And hey, if you're getting a massive Purple Man vibe right here with a character that essentially treats everyone around them like objects, well, then you're not alone, because Jess Prime says that exactly to Jewel's face. In fact, she implies that maybe she's even worse than Purple Man in that regard. Cap Jess, Nitress, and Jess Alias go out of their way to try and fight off the Jess army, but it's quickly made apparent that even though these ones are on Jewel's side, they're not exactly giving it 110 right now, more waiting to see how the fight works out. Jess Prime gets trapped in a drain hole, but it's at that moment Luke Cage actually shows up to help even the odds. He holds evil Jewel Jess so Jess Prime can knock the crap out of her. And oh man, if that's not relationship goals right there, I simply do not know what is. Jess Prime knows that Jewel is far too evil and far too powerful to be allowed to let run free, but at the same time, she knows that she can't be this woman's judge, jury, and executioner, so instead, she decides to hand her over to her own army, before she can ultimately be collected by Night Press's benefactor, who turns out to be the Sorcerer Supreme of her universe, Wanda Strange, who reminds us that this mission was always more about than just stopping a universe-hopping serial killer, but also trying to reclaim her stolen Eye of Agamotto. The very same Eye of Agamotto that is currently in the hands of Alias Jess. She thinks for a second that she could use this amazing power to reshape the world exactly like how she wanted it. She could finally be with her lover Matt. But even though it's what her heart deeply desires, she knows at the end of the day that that's the wrong thing to do, and well, it just isn't in Jess's character. Now, as the comic finally comes to a close, all the different Jesses say their own teary goodbyes, having learned a lot about each other and learning that the grass maybe isn't always greener on the other side. And before everything is said and done, the book more or less ends how it began, with Jess talking about makeup and saying how a different shade can change your life. And so that was the Variance issue number 5, everybody, and overall I really liked the conclusion to this story. I'm not gonna say it's perfect, in fact it feels weird that it's only 5 issues. I feel like a 6th issue really could have made this one sing. But the art was stellar, the characterization was great, I love the dark humor, I love the ultimate resolution with evil Jewel Jess. I think this story fits in very nicely in the greater pantheon of Jessica Jones stories, and in a year that was filled with comic book stories that absolutely loved leaning on the multiverse and different variant characters, I think this one really did manage to stand all on its own. Of course, people were quick to compare it to Everything Everywhere All at Once, which, you know, is a good comparison because that's a great movie and this is a great book, wherein coincidentally the main overarching theme kind of ends up being the same, and that is, what if maybe you are the best version of yourself that exists out there in the vast multiverse, you just don't know it yet. Overall, I'd give this one a very strong 9 out of 10. Variance is a very easy shoo-in for my top 10 list of the year overall, and if you've been trade waiting, now would be a good time to check it out.